Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. I hope you're all having a lovely night tonight. In today's episode, I'm going to be debating the one and only Counterpoints, I think US Marine veteran. I may be wrong. Connor, I'm sorry if you're not a Marine. I think you were a Marine. I know you were a vet of some kind, and and an ex-cop as well. So he's a very, well, I want to say man, like a manly man, like the manliest kind of jobs anyway. So let's see how it goes, because obviously, it's no surprise that convincing men of veganism is usually the hardest thing to do. It's actually like really difficult, kind of hard-headed a lot of the time. But we're going to get straight into it. So I'm going to ring Connor now. And then we're just gonna have the discussion. Ooh. Let's see if I can get this to work. Hello.
Hey, you're good on my end.
So I'll just
and then, yeah, if you couldn't, I don't know if you have the ability to come on camera on my end, but that would be fun if you could.
I think I should be able to. That's what I've been kind of faffing on trying to sort out. So just making sure that your volume's not.
Yeah, if so, awesome. If not, it's cool. Like, well, either way, we'll deal with it.
Let's just double check, see how it goes, because I've never tried this. This is the I've done this before with OBS, but I'm using Streamlabs right now, and a very old Mac. So it's just, to be honest, it just does what it wants, really.
Yeah, it's all good. I'm just gonna answer a chat question while you're getting sorted. So somebody asked about a crossbow. I actually bought a crossbow. I got a pistol crossbow. It's from who's it from? GoGun.co. And basically what it is, it's about the size of a regular sized pistol. But you literally cock it like this, and it's magazine fed from the top, so you can basically put out 6 rounds in about, like 10 seconds. So it's pretty dope. Love it. Home defense javelin, home defense flamethrower. Yeah, chat's in the spirit. I fucking love it. Bazooka for home defense. True, so true. As a matter of fact, what was I thinking? That going back to what was that Quentin Tarantino movie? Is it Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? The home defense flamethrower? Fucking based, dude. Based.
Right. I think it should be working, and I don't know why it's not.
It's okay. They can still see your Brit on your face. If it's not good, we can just get into it. It's fine. They can see my face, and chat is a little feisty. I don't think they're used to seeing me during the daytime. So it's like
right. So it's just like a kind of an anomaly.
Yeah. So we're doing the Hassan daycare thing where people are at like work, or they're in high school or some shit, and they're like working from home, and they're just we're gonna be memeing in their background. So yeah.
Not really. Oh well, that's well, for here it's like 6 p.m. So it's like prime time, really. But like it was either that or like 4 a.m. for you. So for me, so it's whatever's really best, as long as this is all right for you. But yeah, it's nice to speak to you again as well. Obviously, last time we spoke, we talked a lot about Warhammer, Star Trek, and Vorsh, and all that sort of stuff as well. Obviously, this time I want to kind of, because I think last time we even said like, oh, but like we're gonna have to have a oh god, it's like apparently the stream's like lagging. I'm just having like a hell of a time because I've got this like ancient Mac.
Well, the good news is you're 100% on my end. So
is it 100% on your end? Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah. People, right. You could probably get a decent, if you wanted to rip it and upload it to your stuff, you could probably get a decent rip, and then I've been able to hear you the whole time.
We'll just try. All right. Well, that's it. Well, anyway. So, so. Yeah, all right, it's back working again now. Okay, cool. So yeah, right, yeah, last time we didn't really get onto veganism so much. We talked a little bit about nature, but yeah, we never really kind of hit home with the whole vegan argument. Now I know you've got limited time, so I'll try and make this quick. Um, I know you care about others because I was in your charity stream, like what was it, like 3 days ago, for the guy who was getting like liver surgery and stuff,
Yeah.
which was really cool. I really like that. So I mean, you clearly care about other individuals, clearly have like ethics. So I'm not going to sit here and convince you other people are valuable, because it seems like you already believe other people are valuable. I'm going to ask why you don't consider animals valuable if you consider humans valuable.
Yeah, so I consider animals to be valuable on a scale. And Sam Harris, the late, no, he's not even late, the great Sam Harris, he was talking about this from a like ethical consumptive standpoint, where you could probably have like an XY axis with emotional intelligence and intelligence, and kind of like graph out which animal is valuable from an experiential standpoint, and as a result, try to consume as ethically as possible within that framework. And like mollusks or clams being on the lower end, because they don't have like a
Central nervous
lot
system.
of right, yeah. And then on the high end, obviously, would be like dogs and pigs, because they are like quite intelligent and emotionally intelligent and all that kind of stuff. And I'm okay with that. As a matter of fact, I think you're probably going to find me conceding a lot, but that's because people presume because I consume meat that I think it's okay. I think there's a bunch of like evolutionary and naturalistic reasons for why we consume meat, and once we're able to evolve past them, I'm perfectly okay with it. So, for instance, like I'm a huge fan of lab-grown meat. I hope that in the future we can almost like 95% substitute meat consumption with lab-grown stuff, and then I'll leave it there because I could keep ranting for like another 10
Yeah,
minutes.
no, that's cool. So it seems like you agree that animals have value. You just sort of put value. I guess the one thing I want to push back on is why it has anything to do with, let's say, intelligence necessarily, or like take for example, like obviously pigs and dogs. I mean, pigs, obviously people eat pigs. Like the majority of the population eat pigs, and they're like the third or fourth smartest animal that we know of. That they're actually really quite intelligent, but even if they weren't intelligent, why would it matter? There's that famous quote from Jeremy Bentham. What is it that should trace the inseparable line? Is it the faculty of reason, or perhaps the faculty of discourse? But a full-grown horse or dog is by far a more rational and communicable animal than an infant of a day, a week, or even a month old. And if it were not, what would it avail? The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And I think that's where I would really like to kind of push things, because I think no matter how we'll kind of try to break down moral value, it always comes down to the experience of an individual. Did they have a positive or negative experience? What are they trying to achieve in their life? If it's meaningful, that meaning is still going to be around a sense of achieving some sort of positive goal, and that goal is going to be something that someone actually experiences, right? So you could have a supercomputer, and it could be incredibly intelligent, but it mightn't feel anything. So why would we, like, another way to push back is like people with learning disabilities. Like, why would we consider not eat people with learning disabilities? Or, well, why would we not eat children and infants? Like, why would that be wrong? And why would we not then consider like supercomputers at NASA to be like the most valuable beings in the universe?
Yeah, so on one hand, there's like you gave me a lot, so I'll try to track down as many leads as I can. So number one, why don't we supremely value the supercomputers at NASA? I think to an extent we do, and I think that so for instance, like Joe Rogan brings this up. I think he's a fucking lunatic, and he probably smokes too much pot, but it's an interesting idea worthy of consideration, which he doesn't know if human life is the final evolution of intelligence within the world, or if we are going to end up being the like cocoon through which immortal machine life, synthetic though it may be, but like machine life, which then can kind of like populate the stars because they don't have the biological constraints that we do, and with like a combination of like AI and metal and this, that, the other, and 3D printers, maybe they can evolve into something that will dominate the stars way beyond our biological lifespan. So that's kind of an interesting thought experiment, but that's just a different tangent, not a tangent related to your arguments.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that,
to
I was going to say, just add on
yeah,
that. Have you seen the sci-fi where it's like the end state of capitalism is a factory on like Mars, where it is just making itself constantly. No one exists. All humanity's dead, but there is just a factory that exists and it constantly makes itself as the end of capitalism.
Making Funko Pops on the face
Yeah,
of
exactly.
Mars
Just making
in eternity to perpetuate its own existence. Yeah, that would be that's fucking awesome. So hold on. Let me address some of your points instead of tangenting out on stoner fucking subplots. So why don't we eat the mentally disabled or the or children? For the mentally disabled, I think it's because we've done that in the past, where we said, "Oh, these people," used to call them useless mouths, right, in like Nazi Germany, and then we executed all those people. But then people took that eugenicist perspective pretty far, and just ended up butchering hundreds or thousands of millions of people. And then we adopted the kind of framework that you're talking about, where we value individualist consciousness and sense and suffering in order to be empathetic to minimize at least human suffering. And if you were just to ask me, like, flat out, should we minimize animal suffering across the board? The answer is obviously yes. And then when it comes to children, the reason why we don't eat children, even though they might be less emotionally or psychologically as intelligent as fully adult animals, the reason why we don't do that is because that's the continued propagation of our species. So, basically there's an in-group tribal basis. But I'm just being descriptive. I'm not even being moral at this point.
You see, I don't even think there is
if
I'm honest, I don't think there is an in-group tribal basis for humanity. I think, like, if you look, like, right now, I mean, you could not get closer to, like, in-groups and than Ukraine and Russia in terms of national identity. And yet they're just butchering each other right now. And I mean, obviously, Slava, Ukraine and all that, but
fabricated tribal identity?
I think all identity is necessarily produced upon reflection. I mean, that's what identity is, right? Like, to even have the notion of like a self-identity is to reflect upon the I. The I is the self-association with the concrete existence of your experience, right? It's not you to have an identity. It has to be a mergence between essence, like the concept of what we are, and the concrete existence of what we are, or what something is. And that would be what we mean when we say something is itself. To even say it is itself is to apply almost a contradiction. It's to apply that something else, like A equals A, and that original, like, if you look at it, if you do it like in a kind of Kantian format, when you think of it in a temporal sense, we are necessarily having to look at one being or the possibility of one existence and another as equating to each other in a way which is indiscernible. And that's where you get like the identity of indiscernibles in Leibniz.
Okay, do you extend this sense of, like, if I heard you correctly, you're saying that identity is the ability to, like, reconcile with one's own experience and then, kind of deal with material reality. Do you just, like, yes or no, do you extend this to animals? So, for instance, like a mollusk or a clam or a lobster, do you believe that they have that ability to be?
I think they all have the ability to be, but not know that they are, if that makes sense. That conscious but not self-conscious. I don't know about mollusks necessarily, and clams. I wouldn't it's kind of hard because even vegans debate on whether they're conscious or not because of the kind of simplicity and the lack of behavioral indicators.
Of their structure.
The lack of kind of behavioral indicators there. Like there's very little to distinguish between a mollusk and a or like a clam and a plant. It's really difficult to actually do it. I mean, all we have is kind of neural ganglia, and we know that they're more sophisticated than plants, but we don't know if they're necessarily sophisticated enough for consciousness. So, I mean, that's kind of a job for research more than anything, which is why I would probably say I'd probably just err on caution.
Okay.
But in terms of even other insects, like insects that are more complex, like central nervous systems, or octopi with complicated, like ganglia.
You're gonna find more concessions than you're even ready to deal with. I don't think I could ever personally eat a dolphin or a squid or an octopus just because I know of their level of like emotional, social, and general intelligence. So even if somebody was like to already butcher the animal and it was just going to go to waste anyways, I literally wouldn't take a bite just because I wouldn't want to incentivize the practice of eating these
But
animals.
if that's the case, why would you eat a cow, a chicken, or a pig, man? Like they're like all of them. Like don't get me wrong. I think intelligence. I don't think is necessarily important at all. I don't think intelligence matters. But even if it did, like clearly they're intelligent enough to have awareness of their own existence, to like awareness of a means ends relationship. You can see like when a chicken is kind of happy or
Well,
not happy, you know.
let me expand and just kind of highlight the worldview, and then you can kind of take it apart after. So, so what I would say is that we're all biological and mortal creatures. We all have a certain amount of time on this planet, and it seems like there's a peak that's around adulthood from like a biological or evolutionary sense, where you're raised in childhood. You're probably at your most like virile and strong as you reach the late childhood, and then you kind of move into adulthood, and that's sustainable for a certain amount of time, and then after that there's just kind of this decline into the grave. So for me, what I would say is that we should, if we're to reach the goal of reducing suffering amongst animals that we consume, we shouldn't consume children animals. We shouldn't consume even young adult animals. We should give them some time to enjoy and be. And then when it comes time to slaughter, it shouldn't be this horrific pseudo-genocidal mud and blood and torture and screaming and crying and death and all that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, an example of humane butchering is they actually genetically engineered and selected for pigs that don't panic due to asphyxiation in, I want to say, like the Netherlands or something like that. And as a result, they literally have generation after generation after generation of pigs that whenever a pig panics when they're in this room, that basically like removes all the oxygen and they go to sleep. The ones that just go to sleep, they keep. The ones that panic, they eliminate from the gene pool. And so now they have like multiple generations of pigs that literally grow up into adulthood in order to literally just fall asleep in a room and they lose consciousness, and then you're able to butcher and eat them, and there's no pain on their end. So I would view, if we're going to continue to consume animals, if we could move to a model that's as humane as that, then I think that would be necessary. And the second we're able to move to a lab-grown meat version, I would do that as well. When it comes to like the... Sorry, 1 second. Let me give you one more thing.
No problem.
And then you can tear it apart. So one more thing. I think that there is a interesting moral phenomena where you're evolving past even the points of these animals. You know, these animals consume other animals. Humans have consumed animals for a long time. You look at our biology, we basically seem to be adept at doing it. And there's also a certain amount of hunting and consumption that's even good for the animal population. So, for instance, when it comes to grizzly bears, once they get over 1,200 pounds, they're such a dominating force. They will kill the cubs of other female bears in order to, like, then in turn inseminate that female. And basically, that's actually genetically bad for the biodiversity of the species. So, actually, culling that animal and consuming that animal would be a moral good. So I think that's more than enough to break off. So
yeah,
have at it.
Yeah. So like the first thing I'd push back on is really like, so like in terms of the selective breeding of the pigs. I mean, like even to get to that position, you've basically got to torture a considerable amount of pigs. But two, I would also. I'd be dubious of whether it's actually true in the sense that the way that you think it's painless, in terms of the gas chambers that we actually put pigs into, we usually pump it full of carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide basically makes you feel like you're burning from the inside out because it's a cheap way of doing it. So they don't actually really kill them in a way that is quote unquote humane. And three, even when they do say it's humane, I was watching a slaughterhouse, like the footage of a slaughterhouse, and everything was up to FSA standard in the UK. Joey Carbstrong covered it, put hidden cameras in the slaughterhouse, that kind of thing, and the bolt got a cow in the head, but it was still conscious, and then proceeded to just cut its head off. Like the people committing the actions in slaughterhouses are usually mentally disturbed. It comes part and parcel with the job. It's actually really quite tragic on behalf of the humans involved. I did a video on it because it is actually tragically bad. Most of the people taking these jobs, no one wants to work in a slaughterhouse, right? Like, if we're being honest, like, it's just a horrible job. It's extremely dangerous, incredibly stressful, and on top of that, you're just murdering things all day long, right? Like, so it ends up being like immigrants, like illegal workers in the US is a big one, and in the UK it's like Polish or like EU immigrants from Eastern Europe who just are looking to get away and make some money. And they end up just having to do these absolute brutal jobs all day in and day out, and it has an absolute horrible adverse effect on their psychology to the point in which they're having like horrific like insomnia, nightmares, drug abuse, like psychological doubling, like you name it. It's really bad. So like I would be dubious as to whether like almost any claim that there is this notion of humane slaughter. I don't think it exists. And even if it did exist,
do you think on the scale? Yeah, I was about to ask. Do you think on the scale, bolt gunning a cow to the head versus let's say that they use like carbon monoxide instead of dioxide or whatever? We could look it up because I'm pretty sure they claim that it's close to painless.
They can't use carbon monoxide though because it's like poisonous to us. Sorry.
Okay, interesting. No, that's interesting. So then the question kind of becomes, let's say that there was a hypothetical way in which we wouldn't poison ourselves, but we would be able to slaughter these animals in the way that I described. Don't you think that it would be preferable to move to that system over our current system that you just horrifically described?
Well, it's like yeah, I mean, in the same way that it's preferable that, like, in the Holocaust, that the Jews were being gassed in the first instance with one gas, and then it got the Isoton B. I can't remember, where it was extremely painful. Zyklon B. That's it. Yeah, horrible way to die, but very cheap. But the in one respect, it's better. That in the first instance, but it would be better again if no one was getting gassed. do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, even if we could do it in a painless way, why do it at all? Like, is there a humane way to kill someone who doesn't want to die? And I think the answer is, like, if you can avoid killing them, then the right thing to do is to avoid killing them.
Yeah, so actually this kind of brings us back to a moral question that I have. Your kind of moral position is like predicated on the fact that other animals don't want to die, so why would we kill them? This, that, the other. This, state of affairs doesn't really exist for almost any other biological creature on the planet. Like, every other biological creature is like, how do I consume biomass in order to forward my own existence?
Yeah.
And then once I do so, cool. And then, I'll make some more babies, and then et cetera, et cetera. So why are we evolving? Like, so for instance, like, I agree with you that reducing the general suffering of living creatures on the planet is a noble and worthy of pursuit goal. Like as a matter of fact, I did the math on how much meat I was consuming. And basically, I think probably in 2015, I was consuming one whole cow, like 200 chickens, and probably 300 fish a year. Okay, that's how much meat I was consuming, because I was literally having meat on every meal. And I was like, if I was forced to slaughter my own animals, would I be consuming this much meat? And the answer is absolutely fucking not. So what I did is I probably reduced my meat consumption by like 90%. Like, I don't have it for every meal. I might have it once a day, once every 3 days or whatever. And I think that's more in line with kind of like the cull, like, genetic biodiversity model, where we're not in a unstable harmony with nature, where we're literally like doing this almost like like this Nazi level genocide against animals every year, but more like we're doing what we would do in a state of nature.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Nazis have nothing. There's something to say that the Nazis have nothing on the amount of killing that we do. The Nazis are just absolutely pathetic compared to the amount of killing we do. We kill about
billions.
We kill about 70 to 80 billion land animals a year for consumption, and then in fish, it's in the trillions. It's about 2 trillion fish, 1 trillion to 2 trillion fish. It's measured in tons because we can't count them, so we just measure it in tons. I mean, they literally rip so many fish from the ocean, like with like the like sort of dredging nets, that that like they get 3 times as many fish that aren't even ate. They're just thrown back into the ocean dead. Because they're not actually like consumed by anyone. No one buys them. No one actually eats them. So
So
like,
what would be the ideal natural life for these creatures? Because like the alternatives, we're all gonna die, right? So the alternatives within like a state of nature are basically like, okay, humans get you in a trawl net, they drag you out, you asphyxiate to death, they consume you on the market to the tunes of trillions of your species. That's one option. Another option is you swim around, you probably get a little bit slow, a little bit tired, a little bit sloppy, and then another creature comes and consumes you.
yeah, like eviscerate you or something.
So
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. But I
yeah,
mean,
so
I'm
I'm
not
not saying
responsible
one
for
is
the.
better or the other. I'm just saying like what is the to the creature, the prey animal that's being consumed. If humans were to get this like more humane level of slaughter, would it be preferable to be a tamed, domesticated animal on a farm that is capable of being like kept into adulthood and then have a relatively painless death in adulthood, or would it be better to remain within a state of nature?
But
Like
I
what
think
would
that's
be the
like a false
preference?
dichotomy, right? Because like the way that it
Why? It's the
because
only dichotomy that exists.
well currently, but I think it's a false dichotomy in the sense that one, like they would coexist. So you'd end up with an animal living on a farm and an animal in nature being eviscerated. Like it's the same thing with hunters when they say like, oh, I go out and hunt. Often like they aren't like, and they say like, well, it's better to get a bullet through the head than to be ripped apart by a wolf or something like that, which is, yeah, it probably is, except the wolf is still going to go and murder something else. It's going to go and kill something else. That's what a wolf does, right? It's not going to be like, oh, I best just starve to death now. So like the way that like nature really works is like, unless you're talking about the annihilation of nature and the way that things are actually going on, then all you're doing is propagating additional harm. And that's that it's more of like, now you have animals being raised on a farm and having their throats slit, as well as animals in nature being like eviscerated by the natural predators. But even then, right, you got to understand that, to be honest, domestication is for the most part actually much worse. Even animals in zoos, there's a actual a mental illness in zoos called zoochosis, where the animals just basically can't cope with being confined. Animals aren't really meant to be domesticated. Evolution has given them the natural faculties to deal with their predators and to evade capture and to live a life in nature and to enjoy, to a lot of extent, a life in nature. But it hasn't given them the capacity to cope with extreme boredom and psychological pressure and the other horrible. I mean, you've got animals that are essentially, you've got like elephants that are swinging side to side because they're alone, and elephants are never alone in the wild. You've got,
Well,
like
right, but
orcas who are living in like
isn't that an
swimming
argument
pools.
for like gradual? So hold on, really quick. Yeah, so with the zoopsychosis, like this would be an argument, not like, number one, that's not domestication, that's just incarceration. Two, when it comes to zoos and the state within these things, that's not an argument for the lack of zoos of existing. That's an argument for the zoo care and enrichment and training and socialization to be more in line with nature, so animals can live like happy, healthy, fulfilled social lives. Just because they're not at this time doesn't mean that's not possible. There's
I mean, you can find
obviously
sanctuaries.
way better environments, and then also there's domesticated animals like dogs and cats. So you wouldn't say like, oh, domestication. Well, and then this is kind of the question. Like, so for instance, like as a lamb, right, or like a sheep or a ram. Would it be better to live on a farm, be a part of a social tribe for, I don't know, half a decade, and then end up, one time, again, I'm advocating for like the most humane slaughter possible. Let's say that we figured this out. Would it be better to have that humane slaughter, or would it be better to exist in a state of nature? And I think like when you're saying like, oh, well, now both evils exist coinciding, you haven't reduced the amount of evil in the world. We're not talking about like the utilitarian evil. We're talking about an individualist evil. If you were that creature, what would you prefer?
I mean, that's the thing.
And I think we
like,
can answer that question from some level of empathy.
I,
And then, sorry, real quick before I let you go, I just want to ask you this question because somebody was nice enough to do a dono, and I want to incentivize them to continue to do so. What do you think of in-group kinship between like different tribes, specifically that of humans? And do you believe that human life is more important than animal life?
to answer the last question, I would say that the most important thing to recognize is universality of identity, and the universality of identity is really like to recognize that when we create determinate identities that are limited identities, let's say like an individual is really only understood in relation to a collective, like a genus or a species. How we, basically create notions of a genus or a species are based on the foundations of self-association. So like, why am I associated with this other and not, let's say, that other, like, why am I British and not Irish? Why am I like, Scottish and like not Scottish and all that? But then when we look at it in terms of not just identities which allow me to have some sort of self-knowledge, but in terms of just like individualistic preferences and like maybe relations in terms of language and culture. But if I look towards, let's say, I don't know, what I am, what it means to be, like the fundamental tenets of my existence, these are universal and ubiquitous amongst all humans, right? Like, and that's why, like, even in the ancient Greeks, like the Stoics even started talking about the notions of humanity. They started putting forth a universal notion of humanity because they realized, well, the only things that are like the fundamental tenets of our nature are universal amongst all of these beings. But even then, why do we put that as the limitation for ethical consideration? Like, why would we say that? Fucking hell, Charlie, it's Avi. It's Avi's son. Like, why would we say that that is, let's say, the moral baseline? Like, why do we give humans like value and not, let's say, pigs, chickens, cows? It's the same reason why we wouldn't give, let's say, if you're a Roman, you didn't give someone from Gaul value. It's an arbitrary measure. When we look at what is valuable and why it is valuable, it has the same universal same universal component, and that's sentience, the value experience that we have. And when we associate with that, which we necessarily do in ethics, to even engage in ethics, we associate with this notion of value and the propagation of value at a universal level. If we arbitrarily limit it, then we've limited ourselves and our own possibility of happiness anyway. We've basically created a false identity.
Okay, but do you think that, for instance, like up until probably the past 2 centuries, this wasn't even a moral consideration on like the human radar, except for in like niche circumstances.
Yeah, niche circumstances.
And then also there was necessity kind of driving this. So like
necessity.
Human beings, their individual will to survive is not going to overcome their sense of, or it will overcome their sense of empathy for other living creatures. So if there's a famine, or if there's a calorie shortage, or there's a war, or this, that, the other, it seems like these moral considerations seem to go out the window, and then we default to these like in-group tribal preferences, and then we slaughter what we need to slaughter in order to survive ourselves.
Well, yeah, I think that's just like, as you say, like kind of self-preservation. But I think that's the downfall of ethics. What you're seeing is like tragedy. This is like Easter Island, right? Like if you're on Easter Island, you're probably going to eat other people, even in the same tribe, because, well, there's not enough food. Like, it doesn't mean that you should eat other people. In like, the thing is, in our society, it's not should you eat, like, it's not, a state of scarcity in where you could not obtain calories from another source. It's just taste pleasure.
Right. And that was actually what I was going to push at. So you're seeing that from a logistical perspective, we have evolved past this need.
Yeah,
I want to test that a little bit. So for instance, nowadays we're dealing with like, food shortages, logistics, supply chains issues, increases in costs, this, that, the other. I'm not talking specifically about meat, but even like, dairy or whatever. So if a human being was, basically charged with an evaluation, either to continue their moral perspective that they shouldn't be consuming the products of other conscious creatures, or to starve, or to die, would you fault them morally for making that decision to continue to consume another animal's product?
So, if I understand this correctly, like, are you saying like if it was a matter of survival? Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. I mean, yep. Like that's in the vegan definition, right? Like, so the definition of veganism by the Vegan Society is is a philosophy and a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation and cruelty to animals for the benefit of animals, humans, and the environment, right? And the main thing there is like possible and practicable. Possible basically meaning can you do it? Practicable mean is it reasonable? Like would you have to basically self-sacrifice, like feed yourself to lions or something like that? Like that kind of thing to avoid causing animal suffering.
No, that's a base definition, and I largely agree with it, and agree with it particularly on a long-term scale. I think that if we create lab-grown meat that has similar biological properties to like living meat, then the argument for consuming living meat drops to almost zero.
But there's no argument now. There's no argument right now. Like, if I'm entirely honest with you, there is
no good argument.
No good argument. Well, yeah, I get you could argue for anything necessarily, but there's no good argument in terms of nutrition. Like, some of the old, like the Adventist vegans, they got the oldest living population. Like the average, have the lowest risk of all-cause mortality in the world, and have an average lifespan of, I think it's 100, like it's 90 to 100 or something. It's ridiculously high. If you look at like the Okinawans eat 1% animal products. 60% of their diet's like sweet potatoes. Like animal products are nutritionally, to be entirely honest with you, not that important for humans. In terms of protein requirements, that's the big one. Everyone thinks protein, right? You need what, like for peak athletic performance, 0.75 grams to 1.1 grams, depending on per pound of lean mass, if depending on caloric intake. And you can achieve that no problem on a vegan diet. I was consuming 130 grams of protein a day, no problem. So, I think, and that's not even including the fact that we've got like protein supplements if you want to take them now, which like every bodybuilder takes them, whether they're vegan or non-vegan anyway. So, it's not like we're no longer in a situation where, like, as you say, like material confinements of the past. Yeah, okay, like there was probably a time when we needed to kill animals to survive, and arguably even kill each other to survive. But that's not now, and I don't think that we should judge our ethics and our behaviors off what we had to do prior to survive, to get to the place where, like, they suffered so we could, they crawled so we could walk,
Do you agree that this the viability of your perspective is at least young, like historically? Like I'm sure there were like vegans and ultra pacifists throughout like all of history. I'm just saying, like, exactly what you just said, where materially it's possible within the Western world in particular to have a nutrient-rich diet that excludes the suffering of animals. Would you agree that that's difficult, like technologically only really feasible within the past like 200 years or so?
I mean, it made it easier. I mean, obviously industrial agriculture made everything easier. But I don't know, like, because obviously if you look at the history of Vietnam, for example, they have very very vegan kind of culture, like meat replacements and stuff like that were really popular there. Like some of them are like 800 years old. I guess it depends. Like, I mean, in general, the biggest problem is, to be entirely honest with you, is like the winter in the northern hemisphere. That probably, but that would have been a bigger problem, I think, for like, prior to like even the Middle Ages. That's when you're probably looking at that. And then even then, like, animal products were very much a luxury commodity. They weren't eaten by the average individual. If you look at not very often, because if you look at even the English language, the words for the animals are like cow, chicken, and pig. Take cow, for example. Cow is the name of the animal, but then beef is the name of the meat. And the only reason for that is because the Normans invaded in 1066 and they all spoke French. And the French for cow is boeuf. And so when they would refer to the meat, they would call it boeuf. And so in the English language, we have that Latin origin, which is boeuf, which became beef. And we'll have cow for the animal because the Saxons, who were the basically enslaved peasant class, raising the animals, didn't eat them. They would call them cows. And the people eating the animals called them boeuf, beef. So then you have that kind of like kind of class-based structure already forming even 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to appeal to history, I can as well, which is part of the reason why I significantly reduced my meat intake is because I don't think that, the hunter-gatherer tribes like woke up and then they were able to just butcher to their heart's content every level of meat that they wanted to. I think that they probably spent a few days hunting. There was a few hunts that failed and a few hunts that were good, and then eventually they got something that they needed. And they kept it, eat it, skinned it, used its bones, and used that to continue the propagation of the tribe. And so as a result, probably only 10%, less than 10% of the caloric consumption of, even like ancient hunter-gatherers, like the most like, physiologically Chad people on the planet, that was probably only 5 or 10% meat. So yeah, like I agree with this. And then also with like the Okinawans and the Okinawans and the Corsicans. Sorry, one second. The Okinawans and the Corsicans, one of the other reasons why they believe they live so long is because the limited amount of meat that they do consume is fish-based. And it's omega-3 fatty acids and an omega-6 fatty acids, and it's very, rich. And as a result, they believe that, basically consuming the healthy fatty acids along with a low meat diet does contribute to them having on average the longest lifespans on the planet. The one thing that
second longest.
I would say that we probably have like 90 to 95% agreement. The one thing that I'm rejecting is just the fact that I think that this is fairly normal. I think it's normal within the natural world. I think it's a little weird to take a moral presumption that is exterior to the species of every other creature on the planet. And I think that
ridiculous.
If you look at it from like an evolutionary
standpoint,
it's pretty clear we evolved to be omnivores.
Evolved to be omnivores is kind of contentious. I mean, we've evolved to be croctivores, really, because like if you look at
croctivores, explain that term.
Beings who eat cooked food. For the most part, like the way that our digestive systems and everything, we're not actually eating raw food for humans is just, we suck at it. We're really suck at it. If you look at it, we've basically evolved to the point in which we've technologically augmented our evolution to outpace everything else around anyway. So that's kind of like, like one of the big things is like even at the point of like hunter-gatherer society, it's like, why did we move from the trees? Because like obviously we're supposed to be ape-based. Why did we move from the trees, from a high glucose diet? The only reason that we can think of is that we probably had some sort of like famine. There was some sort of like blight or something that was killing the trees, and that would have forced humans to the ground, or like proto-humans to the ground, basically. And those
or even just exploring and eating different shit is it's you got millions of years to evolve. Like even experimenting with shit, you can find new ways to do things. I mean, you look at flightless birds, or
True. I mean,
you can look at all sorts of crazy evolutionary shit that people seem to fall down paths and then just keep doing the thing that worked that one time.
But I mean, if you look, we moved. It was a very nomadic change. We moved from Africa, and then we just started exploring. We started moving into Europe, into Asia, across continents. And the reason that we think we're doing that was probably following animals, but also looking for food sources, because all of our natural food sources had basically been annihilated. But the one of the big kind of points in this really is that we already had to have the intelligence to construct traps, to create weapons and tools. And if you look at that, that takes like a fairly rich diet already. We were already mentally more capable than your average ape, or even like your average animals around were, because of the diets we were consuming prior to eating meat. So even to eat meat, we already had to have a necessarily fairly rich diet, and that's probably being high glucose content. I mean, if you look, even like humans, like in terms of the enzymes, we have 3 enzymes to break down carbohydrates. And if you try to put a carb blocker on, your body will repurpose one of your other enzymes to break down carbohydrates. Your body really wants glucose. Your brain runs primarily on glucose and ketones really only come into effect if you're starving. So it's one of those things where I think that, yeah, we are omnivores, like we have the capacity to eat meat, but in terms of whether it's evolutionarily like necessary, I don't think there are any real benefits to eating meat. In fact, if you look at the studies that we see today in terms of health outcomes, vegans outperform meat eaters, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing for health because I mean I drink, eat shit. I'm not. I'm not arguing like become a vegan because necessarily I'm healthier. But in terms of the natural benefits of eating meat, there are none comparatively to not eating meat. Most of our meat, dairy, and eggs are
The
associated with 14 out of 15 of our number one causes of death.
Well, right, but the comorbidities or whatever the causes of death are cancer and heart disease,
Yeah.
whereas in the past we didn't even get to live that long.
Yeah.
And the reason, basically, cancer and heart disease being our primary problems, I know that it's tragic, and whenever I lose a family member or lose something that I love to one of these diseases, it's still a tragedy, even if they've lived a full life and this, that, the other. But the point is that like we're all making evaluative choices about our health and how to move on. I would say a carnist diet or a heavy meat diet is obviously unhealthy because I don't think that we said anything that necessarily disagrees with each other. You're
Yeah.
saying that
Yeah. I
like
don't think so either.
we've evolved past the need to eat meat, and our biology is built so that we can sustain ourselves based off of things that don't violate the individuality of other living creatures.
Absolutely.
I don't
Yeah.
disagree with that. And then when what I'm saying is we've evolved in a certain sense to violate the individuality of other creatures on occasion, to supplement our diets, this, that, the other. Whether or not it's necessary, don't really, who knows. And then as soon as one of the things that I liked about what you said about like the vegan ethos or motto or statement or whatever was practicable and something else.
Possible.
But basically,
Possible and practicable.
yeah, possible. Implement it as you can. And so I think that a cultural push from vegans or people in particular who want to reduce animal suffering, particularly within the next century, as alternatives become more and more available, I think that's a good thing, generally speaking.
I mean, like,
the only
do you think you can be
minor
vegan?
point of contention, minor point of contention, the only thing that I want to push back on is I have these. Like
The canines.
these.
Are you pointing to canines by any chance? I can't see it. Like, I'll go
Yeah,
back.
I'm pointing at canines,
Yeah.
and I got these, which are eyeballs on the front of my head. And from an evolutionary argumentative standpoint, prey animals, who are primarily herbivores, they'll have their eyeballs on the sides of their head because they're basically evolved to look out for peripheral danger. Whereas creatures that have eyeballs in the front of their head are typically hunters because they are looking for the prey.
That's an oversimplification.
Well, you can argue it if you want, but I mean, I don't see how it's arguable.
100%. So it's an oversimplification. If you look at apes, they climb trees, they swing from trees, they need really great up and down capabilities. If you look at basically even small monkeys who get preyed upon, they have eyes that are facing forward because they necessarily need them. Even in terms of our canines, if you look at our canines, our canines are absolutely tiny, and that shows, let's say, an evolutionary history of having some sort of and the actual evolutionary foundation for our canines comes from a very small mammal who ate insects. But the largest canines in the world are owned by herbivores. They're even used for intimidation and just being violent to one another without consuming each other. We'll also have a considerable amount more molars and incisors. Because the majority of our diet hasn't involved ripping and tearing. And as I said, I think we're crocodivores anyway. Our teeth have shrunk. If you put it against even bonobos and chimpanzees, our teeth are about half the size.
Can you define crocodivores again? And then what was the creature with the largest canines?
Creature with the largest canines is there's two. It depends on whether you can either count I think hippos have, it's either hippos or there is a type of monkey.
Jesus.
It's like ape, and they have huge canines. Hippos do on occasion have been known to cannibalize each other, but it's not regular behavior. And the monkeys, I can't remember their diet for the most part, but it was herbivorous.
Yeah, and this actually kind of gets into like we're agreeing, but we're just off by a degree, and maybe that's why we're not landing on the same ground. So looking at like hippos and gorillas, who both have eyes on the front of their teeth and are typically thought to be herbivores.
It's bigger than
they do. Yeah, there are exceptions where, like, so for instance, like you said, just looking it up, what do hippos eat? They're omnivores. They're 99% herbivores, but on occasion they consume meat. And then it's the same thing with gorillas, where 99% of the time they're vegetarian, but then there's some gorilla tribes that have decided to eat bugs. And so yeah, like I actually to tell you something that I learned today. The omnivore versus carnivore eye placement, I appreciate you bringing up that nuance, because honestly, like, yeah, if you're jumping through fucking trees and you have rawly peripheral vision, you're probably going to miss a branch and fucking fall your ass to your death. So that's interesting to think about. But I still think that the assertion is like, you and I are less than 5% off of each other's worldview. I just reserve a little bit of breathing room for nature to be omnivorous, and for the sanctity of individuals to not necessarily be something that nature cares about. And then finally, if we can technologically evolve to a place where being carnists is no longer necessary, we should make that jump.
But what if we're already there? That's my argument. We're already there, right? We don't need it. And then on the with the relationship with the kind of 5% difference, I think probably right. I think we agree on the majority of the facts, especially, in relation to like nature and understanding our place in the world. I think that when we talk about what is our nature, and we look towards, let's say, we try to find one nature in, let's say, we're canines, but I think that we should probably find one nature in our capacity to reason, in our capacity to understand ourselves and live in a way which forwards our own agendas in terms of what we consider to be valuable in our experiences, rather than, let's say, some sort of like hypothetical notion of, let's say, some sort of category. So let me ask this, because I don't want to loop, because I feel like we've covered ground where we like 95% agree with each other. What's the next step from your perspective? Because you're saying that we're already technologically there. I'm not sure if the technology is as widespread as you're saying it is, or it's an alternative that most people would adopt or find legislatively popular. I am all for a cultural push towards, basically low or no meat-based diets and using substitutes in order to supplement your diet where necessary. So I'm all for this, but to you, what's the next step? Is it just arguing it for it culturally? Is it YouTube debates? Is it cultural pushes? Is it legislation? Because you're saying it's already technologically feasible. So what's in the way from the world that you would view as better or best? To be entirely honest with you, I think what's in the way is ourselves. I think that the same thing with most moral or ethical improvements. It's more of the fact that people are scared of change, like myself included. Like, I used to think vegans were like these crazy, like, extremists. You think that they are just, trying to push their agenda on you, and what they're doing is unhealthy, and it's, eating meat, dairy, and eggs, it's natural, normal, and necessary, and it's this ideological constraint that I think's getting in my way. And I think that, the best way to confront that is head on, have conversations with your neighbors, have conversations with others, talk about things, try and reason things out in a way which is, truly, non-biased, and try to remove yourself. And, as Francis Bacon would, called it, kind of ironic bringing up Francis Bacon, I suppose, but, remove the idols of the mind, the idols of the cave, and the idols of, your cultural psychological bias, your personal psychological bias, and hold with scrutiny those things that you find most pleasurable. I think that's often what basically makes us get in the way. I mean, take for example, like, on a very tangenty kind of way to look at it, is like, take Vosh, Xander Hall, they agree with everything a vegan says. They go into a conversation with a vegan, they will agree on everything. They'll be, oh yes, you're absolutely right, animals have value, you're absolutely right, we should do this, you're absolutely right, we should do that, but I want to eat meat, and therefore, even if, and this was Vosh said that he would farm black people. Xander Hall said that he would farm mentally disabled people. And these people are the ones that are supposed to be preaching socialism. And it's like, well, did you fall and hit your head before the debate or something? Like, what how did you even do this? And I think when you realize, like, oh well, the only thing that's actually stopping them is like that is that insincerity. They're not willing to. They're not true. They don't truly believe in their proposed values. And I think that if we live by our values and we reason by our values, I think that would move towards veganism.
Yeah, so this is actually a beautiful, beautiful segue. So, we got like maybe 20 minutes left. Part of the reason why, you asked me to talk, I want to talk, is because I do think that you're very critical when it comes to the space. And I would actually like to expand upon that criticism very specifically with what you said. I just have to answer somebody really quick. So what I would say is it's fucking hysterical to me to have all these revolutionaries who are talking about we need to change this and we need to change that and we need to fix the system and we need to do this. And then you're like, hey, what are you going to do? And they're like, I'm going to spread awareness.
Yeah, exactly. There's no real change. There's like 100%. Like it's one of the biggest things is like, so for example, some of the best people, like, Christians get criticized all the time, but I think it was the Quakers at the time of slavery ran a boycott movement to try and boycott slave cotton to try and bring an end to slavery. And they were attempting to push that. And you find that there's a lot of people who will pay lip service to being anti-slavery, but then would buy slave cotton. So it's like, well, man, like you're either for the abolition of slavery or you're against it. And it's like, it just seems that people will often side with convenience.
Well, I think the reason why I hate to call out the paradigm of this is that YouTube and Twitch politics demands nothing of its audience, okay? We're here to rhetorically solve all of the problems of the world and then go back to our wage cages. That's what we're here to do after donating, our $5 to $20 to our favorite, creator, right? Which people in chat should obviously do so. But the point being that there's no demand in return. Okay, you care about systemic racism, you care about veganism, you care about global warming, you care about ethical consumption, you care about slavery in the exterior world. What are you going to do to minimize your impact in these systems? And then I think because the criticisms primarily come from leftists, and in order to they basically lose political ground by admitting that systems are comprised of individuals, because we're not supposed to change individuals, we're supposed to change systems.
No.
And then also they lose ground because if they push their people too far, demanding of them personal action that might be too high of a bar for the audience to follow, and as a result they will lose that audience member of whom they are demanding nothing besides a $5 donation.
100%. I couldn't agree more. It's all about like it's basically, right, just pander to your audience. That's like, tell them exactly what they want to hear, so they donate and they continue, like, like they're a VGGR or they're a DGGR, and it's just this idea of like, whose team are you on, and it has nothing to do with and even then, like, let's be honest, that's all like if you don't see through the illusion that like Vorsh and Destiny don't give a fuck about actually fighting with each other. Like, if anything, it only facilitates their streams, man. Like, they love it. Like, it's good for them. So, like, in the grand scheme, yeah, they have disagreements, but at the end of the day, they'll go and shake hands at a debate, because they realize, like, look, at the end of it's not about truth. It's not about some sort of political goal. It's about themselves. It's about their careers. And look, I'm not going to blame them necessarily for being career orientated in our society, right? Like, there is an aspect when we have to consider, I also need to survive. Like, but then there's the limit, right? Like, can you consider Hassan a socialist when he goes out, spends $5,000 on a shirt, buys a Ferrari, but then says eat the rich, and that's supposed to be enough?
Listen, number one, okay, it was $1,000 shirt instead of a $5,000
you're
shirt.
right, yeah.
And it was a Porsche, not a Ferrari. Okay, so no, and this is what, like, I lose my fucking mind in this space. But it's like it's almost so laughable that, like, I start to enjoy it after a while, where I have like a certain level of Schadenfreude where like, okay, the things you're saying are absolutely objectionable on a moral basis. They're abhorrent. The fact that you're blackpilling like hundreds of thousands of teenagers into thinking there's no hope for the world and they can't do anything themselves, and they should just donate $5 in order to doomer post with their best friends on the internet because they don't have that many IRL friends. The fact that you're doing this, I have so many criticisms and objections to. But then it jumps the shark logically, philosophically, and morally to the point that it's almost funny, where you're watching people who want to
Oh, it's a black comedy,
capitalism.
man. 100%. It's a black comedy.
Well, yeah, destroy capitalism, destroy law enforcement, destroy social institutions, ignore the standard family structure, ignore conservatism, ignore religiosity, this, that, the other. But then once they have a avatar of their ideology engaging in conspicuous consumption or some level of hypocrisy, they will snap their spines at a 90-degree backwards in order to somehow logically jump through a flaming series of hoops in order to justify that action. Meanwhile, the stated goals of the movements are easing the human suffering of the working class. And it's like,
no,
okay.
Honestly,
right, you deserve the bed of shit that you're lying in, you fucking idiots.
Well, this is, I mean, to be entirely honest, it's unfortunately the case. I think that it's, I think Slavoj Žižek says, like, the first act of violence has to be against ourselves, and I think that he's right. Like, it's not about this side. Everyone has this idea of the glorious revolution where we take down the system. It's like, mate, you are the fucking system. Like, the system is the way it is because you want this, you buy this, you endorse this, and if it changed, you would probably try to bring it back. Like this is like the reality of it. The most fervent leftists would be lost if society actually became socialist. I mean, how could Hassan live his bougie lifestyle in a socialist reality? It wouldn't make sense. And it's like,
because socialism isn't about the wealth of the individual, it's about how that wealth is accrued, and you can technically have luxury under the non-exploitive
it's not
socialist
even that. They're not even that good. They're not even that good. I talked to Vosh, and in my discussion with Vosh, all I said was that landlords would be obligated to act in relation to a socialist ethic, as in they should not exploit workers when they can avoid it. And they should, let's say they're a landlord, they should try to do things like undercut the rent in an area to make it more affordable. So like if you can do that, and then
I'm just an individual. I only have $2 million. It's the system, bro. I'm only making 200,000 a year. I'm only making 300,000 a year. What am I supposed to do? It's just capitalism, man. This is capitalism.
That's it, right? He managed to he basically just said would make it unappealing for people to become socialists. Like, why would anyone become a socialist if you've got to not be as rich as a capitalist? And it's like, have you actually read anything about this shit? Like, it's like BreadTube, right? Like most of BreadTube, like the In the Conquest of Bread by Kropkin. I don't agree with a lot of what Kropkin says in the book, but the main thing he talks about is what's he say? It's the it's need, right? He says it's to the point of need, and he talks specifically about how people are wasting money on frivolous luxuries when we could be giving people food, water, shelter, and that's one of the main reasons that we need socialism, is to basically move from making Fabergé eggs and start moving towards feeding the homeless. And yet the streamers now, they're gilded.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, I don't know, man. I obviously I'm very critical of this, but I think the same thing applies to veganism.
No, I want to shout out, because I've talked about him critically a little bit, like Xander Hall or whatever. He will call this shit out, where he'll be like, "Listen, motherfucker, even on an optical level, this is stupid as fuck." Let alone the moral implications of it. And then I haven't heard him expand upon it in long detail, but I think he's disgusted by some of this. And for me, that's what I'm looking for when I'm talking to these leftoids, is I'm looking for you. Okay, so you've told me your idealized reality, which is workers own the means of production and the decommodification of basic human needs. So basically food, food, shelter, and water is free or so cheap that it might as well be free, and workers have stake in the institutions that they dedicate large portions of their lives.
Yeah.
I'm okay with both of these statements. I'm not sure about governmental force instituting these ideas, but I'm okay with both of these statements and think that they're probably moral goods. And you just have to worry about the negative externalities of giving the government the authority to force this model on everybody. That's what you have to do.
I would agree, but I mean, like, I'm more of an anarchist in that respect anyway. Like, I think that, I think that a lot of people, like, everyone cried to give Obama executive powers, and then when Trump had the executive powers, they're like, shit, what am I gonna do? He's got executive power, and it's like, well, what a fucking surprise! It's almost like you gave him it.
Yeah. And actually, so I identify like civically, not with the Republican Party, but I identify as a Republican. I think you have to have these like hard rules about human rights and process and all that kind of stuff in order to facilitate human progress, but also not do so much progress that you destroy everything, right?
Honestly, the political class, I think just for me, like in my understanding, are the absolute parasites. Like, fucking hell, like I wouldn't trust them. Like I would not trust them at all. Like I don't know how, and like any of them, that just whether they're right or left, are just. They're always self-serving. They're always like, essentially the most backbite, narcissistic, horrible bastards that we elect. But they smile very nice and they kiss babies on the forehead. So like, like that's about it, really.
Okay, so I'm all about parallel structures. I'm all about us doing what we can when we can instead of waiting on elected officials to come save us. But I think that if you look at the writings of the founding fathers and all that kind of stuff, they already knew this. That's why they built the system that they did, was to be a... If you don't have the rules that we have in place, as frustrating as they are, then basically what happens is you have, like what you said, with the executive power. Oh, when your dudes are in power, executive power is awesome. Yeah, just blast past the red tape, blast past legislation, blast past public consensus. Who gives a shit? We're instituting our moral agenda. But then as soon as the shoe's on the other foot and it's literally your political opponents, all of this becomes evil. So the only way to kind of, filter this stuff out is to force people to work together and build consensus within a democratic or Republican system.
I agree with the democracy part of things, as you say that. Like, I think that the problem is that this requires education, which is why, to bring it back to the whole kind of veganism point in the first place, it's why I do what I do, because I think that a lot of the reason that people reject veganism is usually just out of ignorance. They haven't heard it before, that they have like a preconceived notion of it. And when you engage in the media, like, there is a lot of money in agribusiness, like, and the promotion of agribusiness, if public opinion swayed, then big agricultural businesses might lose their huge amount of government subsidies, right? You know what I mean? And so there's billions of dollars in making people believe that you're unhealthy if you're vegan, or vegans are these extremists who just want to force their agenda on others. But until you have a conversation with a vegan, how do you even know? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so what I would say is this is where my Republican brain switches on, because I don't believe in I'm not an egalitarian. I'm not a person who I think that each human life and each life has worth, but I don't I don't believe in like direct democracy or pure democracy, because I don't trust the average person, even when they're educated. And I do think a decent chunk of people are stupid as fuck. And even if you spend your entire lifetime trying to educate them, that doesn't mean that they're going to wield the knowledge that you've given them with any sense of responsibility, which is why I like having codified rules based off of the social structures of the past to restrain the human impulses of even our smartest and strongest people.
I'd probably just quote Winston Churchill. What is it? Democracy is a terrible system. Was it like an awful, terrible system, but it's the best thing that we'll have. It's
except for all the other ones.
Except for the other ones.
Yeah, democracy is the worst system on the planet, except for all the other ones. Yes, I heavily identify with that statement.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the point is that I think it's like trying to, but like even like one of the main things about veganism is I think that it has to come from the bottom up in this respect, right? So like what needs to happen, like you said, like what needs to happen to make this like change, and what needs to happen is people need to stop buying the products. If you don't want others to be harmed for you, stop paying people to do it. it's like people will be like campaigning for people to give up plastic straws, right? Plastic straws are 0.1%, I think, of ocean plastics. 46% of ocean plastics are detached fishing nets. Yet these same people will be consuming fish. The majority of ocean dead zones are coming from animal agriculture, from the sprays that we're spraying on crops to feed animals, or the pollution of blood and piss and shit that gets dumped into rivers. It's probably like 30,000 miles, 35,000 miles of American river now. And like, if you look, even if you're an environmentalist, whether you care about humans and human rights issues, whether you care about animals, there is no argument, I think, at this point which would defend just going out and like, fuck it, I'm going to buy this steak, or I'm going to buy this, like this animal product, rather than just going to like 3 aisles down and buying like an alternative. Do you know what I mean? I mean, shit, like does nobody here like Chinese food or like Indian food and shit? Like you can make all of that stuff with like either tofu or like seitan, or even now like soy, like meat replacements. But even if you didn't want to use that stuff, like half the cooking in like India is just vegan anyway. Do you know what I mean? So like, you can live a happy, healthy lifestyle and just
yeah, I'm
change your choices.
And again, I'm like 95% of the way there, but I like basically what I would like to do is once every 3 months, you and I visit with each other so we can just talk shit about everybody else. Levy, Vokes gave me $10 to ask you this question. So for yourself, for perspective, do you think that Nikocado, Avocado, and people like him have damaged the image of veganism?
I mean, yeah, I do think that the ex-vegans, like there was a big amount of ex-vegans. I mean, Nikocado was always a bit I mean, like, he's not clearly stable.
Is he the guy that's doing mukbangs now and killing the fuck out of himself?
Yeah, he's the guy that's like, he cries incessantly on camera and stuff. He embarrasses himself for money and stuff like that. The guy is like, I think he's lost his shit, to be entirely honest with you. I mean, I'm kind of dubious of whether he even had his shit, but like, this is veganism being a fringe movement sometimes attracts like unstable people. Like, you had Tim Sheaf, and he had like a real god complex anyway. He used to call himself the vegan prince and stuff like that, and he's a capable athlete, but he starved himself nearly to death and drank piss, for whatever reason, and then said that
probably for attention, in order to get the numbers, in order to get the money, in order to
I don't even know. I think some of them are just insane, man. Like, I think, and it's not necessarily something indicative of veganism, because these people come and go. Big problem with veganism was the raw vegans, which was just masking an eating disorder. Usually like young blonde girls masking their eating disorder by saying raw vegan. I'm saying young blonde. I mean like Bonnie Rebecca or whatever. Was it Bonnie Rebecca? Or was it like raw van? Anyway, there was like quite a few of them, like of the similar kind of aesthetic, if you will. And all they would do is just drink juice and eat fruit, and then they'd be like, this is the way that you're supposed to live. But it was just a way of starving themselves. But if you look at like the vegan doctors and the diets that they advocate, it's hit your calories, get your fats, your protein, your carbohydrate, hit your macros and get your micronutrients in. And it was none of that. It was just like eating disorders, and then they all turn ex-vegan and blame veganism for them eating fruit 24/7. It's like, there was a guy
it's like, nah, you fucked up in the first place.
Exactly. There was a guy that I watched, and he was like I remember seeing him, and he used to just walk around Thailand like butt ass naked. Like, he bought like a place in Thailand and was like, we're supposed to live naked. And he walks into a supermarket one day like with clothes on,
hookworms,
like and he's just like, he's just going mental about how the fruit is not ripe enough. And it's just like, fuck, man.
Yeah,
like,
at some point that's just schizo posting.
It's just he's just insane. Like, it was like that. There's a lot of, unfortunately, people like Nikocado and that, I think they did damage the movement, but I don't think they've I think that that's something that most vegans are highly critical of.
Yeah. Well, we are, so I do have a meeting in 10 minutes. I want to hang out with chat for at least 5 and all that kind of stuff. So, it's like 2:19 right now.
Quickly before you go then,
do you want to
quickly ask
you? Please, go ahead.
Why will you kill a pig but not an octopus then, man? Like, what is stopping you from just making the transition?
I don't kill pigs.
So you don't eat pork?
I have beef maybe once every 6 months.
Okay, so why a cow
then? Fish maybe 2 to 3 times a week or so. And it does come down to the IQ EQ kind of like table that I was talking about before. And then I'll tell you, basically, as soon as lab meat is available, like 90% of my protein is already like soy and pea protein and vegetables, and I already consume like smoothies and fruits and all that kind of stuff. That's like 90% of my diet, along with like nuts and all that kind of stuff. But it's the IQ EQ thing. I think we are an omnivoric species, and as soon as like I already feel like I've reduced the suffering that I inflict on the world by like 95%. As soon as I can get it down to zero, through lab meat alternatives, it will be zero, and that's where I'm at.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that you've reduced it. I will say it. Like, it's a good start. But man, like 5%, 5%. Like, for example, if I was only like to make it comparable, like obviously this is going to be
5%
quite
of a Holocaust.
yeah, like 5% of a Holocaust. Yeah, like 5% of like beating
Listen,
children
I
and stuff.
only killed like 6 Jews out of the 6 million. Okay,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
it's not that bad.
Exactly.
Like, what?
I'm glad that you said it and I didn't have to say it, because it's so much more
okay.
contentious from me. Like
I am waiting for the chip. Like I will know I will have made it as a YouTuber or a streamer when there's a no context counterpoints that is not created by myself. That's when I'm gonna know I made it.
Well, honestly, man, like it's been nice talking to you, and like in the future, I really do hope that you can just make that 5% transition. Let us know if you need any help or anything if you do decide. So, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, shout yourself out, and then we'll talk shit in another couple of months.
Oh, yeah.
It's always awesome speaking with you. So tell the 50 to whatever so people, 50 to 100 people in our chat, who you are, what you do, and where they can find you.
Yeah, so my name is Perspective Philosophy, or my name's Lewis actually, but my name on YouTube is Perspective Philosophy. I cover veganism, but I also do politics and philosophy as a whole. I was doing a PhD in philosophy, and I like to talk about the sort of stonery stuff that we were talking about earlier. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, check my channel out. And would you like to shout out yourself?
Yeah, my name's Connor. I run a YouTube channel named Counterpoints. I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd, a Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran. I do like breaking down violence in media, particularly. That seems to be my most popular content, but I also enjoy having political conversations and debates such as this. We're at like 23.4K subscribers right now, and the goal is to break 100K by 2024. So even if you don't check out the channel, I guarantee you there's something there for you. But even if you want to help me just by subbing or watching a few videos or liking or commenting, it's sincerely appreciated, because I don't want to bot my way to 100K, but I do want to make this my full-time gig.
I can't promise that it's not going to happen. Yeah, thanks very much, man, and do go subscribe to Connor, and it's been a pleasure as always, man.
All right, catch you soon, buddy.
In a bit, mate. Bye. Okay. I think that was a nice conversation. Obviously, you had limited by time constraints, and a little political tangent. But I think, for the most part, I think he really just kind of agreed. I think that he realizes that he should change, and I think at the end there, I just wanted to leave it on the fact that in relation to the exploitation of animals, and like whether a 5% of exploitation is acceptable when you could eliminate it entirely. What did you guys think? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? I mean, I always like talking to Connor anyway. I think he's a cool guy. I think he's like one of the most reasonable people on here. IQ and EQ though, yeah, I mean, I do disagree with like IQ and EQ having any real moral purport. I don't see any reason why it would. But I might just do a video on it or something and then send him it, and just like, if like why I would say this is not a good reason. It's kind of hard to unpack everything in an hour, really, like give or take, when you're talking about like what is like the dominant cultural view of our society. It's a bit difficult. Yeah, and he wasn't toxic. Yeah, I think he was really really decent. As always, I think he's a fair guy. He's a fair guy. Great debate. I'll sub to him after he's vegan. Go let him know. Go say just comment that on his video. Just like, I'll sub to you when you're vegan. But yeah, like yeah. Um, oh god, I've got like loads of things. Like you've dropped frames. I would love for this not to happen. If only, if only I had more money to buy a computer. Uh, those two sound smart enough to know 6 mil was BS though. I don't know what that means. Yeah, well, I mean, like, I think there's a point, Alex, like, he knows that the five, like, he even said to me, like, in his own words, that the 5%, like, 5% of a Holocaust, and I didn't have to say that. So I don't know whether driving it, like, if you just drive and you go, like, full on ask yourself and you scream at someone about something they already know, I think that's only going to alienate them further. So, like, I think that the way to do it is really just to let people kind of mull it over. Like, I didn't go vegan overnight. Like, I went vegan like overnight in the sense like I transitioned like that, but it took me months to really come to the conclusion that I should go vegan. It wasn't something that I'm like, oh yeah, like just straight away. It's not something that I think, like, people don't go vegan after a single conversation or even two conversations. Really, it takes a while for it to like kind of for them to work their way through it themselves. And there's a famous quote. It's often attributed to Aristotle, but I don't actually think it is. And it's, a fool tries to convince me of his reasons. A wise man convinces me with my own. And I think that is where I kind of wanted to leave it with Connor, because I think he said it himself. I didn't have to say it. And if he realizes that, then he's going to have to grapple with himself. And at the end of the day, like, at the end of the day, right, if I try and, like, the guy was an army veteran, right, he's not going to, like, I'm not going to be able to, like, it wouldn't work even if I wouldn't want to do it even if I could do it, but I'm not going to be able to, like, bully him into being vegan, right? Like, that's just not, he's just not, even if he thought he was, even if I wasn't trying to bully him into being vegan, but I was coming across over aggressive, he's probably just going to click back into fuck you. Uh, and just meet his head on, because he was like a veteran, right? Like, that's what they do. They don't back down. So, like, like, I think like the best person to fight Connor is Connor. Like, if I'm honest. But yeah, I went vegan in about 5 minutes, but my family was already really an animal rights. So it was hard. It took me like 2 months. It took me like 2 months to be like, where I'm like, yeah, maybe I should go vegetarian. And then I was like, vegetarians, there's nothing in vegetarianism, it's just a lie. And then trying to find, like, inductively try to find, like, avenues out. Well, even the actual carnivore diet idiots, like, I don't know why, like, I don't know what I mean, to be entirely honest with you, I think they're just like, I don't know, man, like, the carnivore people are often, I think, a little bit, like, it's kind of like the raw vegans, right? Like, they're the raw vegans of the omnivores, right? Like, they're like, I'm a carnivore, and like that, like, it's like, are you okay? You're not okay, are you? It's like Jordan Peterson saying, like, he drank apple juice and then had a feelings of impending doom. It's like, man, that wasn't the apple juice. Like, I don't know what the fuck unless you've put something much stronger in that apple juice will not give you, even if you've got the worst bacterial infection in your gut, will not give you a sense of, like, existential crisis. The existential crisis, even your interpretation of your own bodily emotion, of your own bodily sensation as an existential crisis, should be an eye-opening kind of psychological event where you're like, why do I interpret this biological negative as being impending death. Like, and I think that probably, like, you know, it's like Joe Rogan and stuff like that. It's like Joe Rogan, like, says some cool stuff, you know, that kind of thing now and again, and I like his whole stuff on weed and that. But often it's like, I think it's his identity. Like, there's got to be like this, like, man, and he's quite a short guy. And I think that it's like a compensation thing. He's got to be as muscly as possible and as manly as possible. And I think being vegan would be like antithetical to that. You've got to have enough confidence in yourself as a man to go, yeah, I'm soy as fuck. Like, what about it? You're gonna, what are you gonna do? You know, and that takes a lot more courage, I think, as a man to be able to stand up to your male peers and go, actually, there's nothing effeminate about my lifestyle at all. Like, why do you even think that? Are you so insecure that you are scared of anything that could remotely make you look feminine? So I'm from Canada. We refer to LSD as apple juice. Maybe it was LSD. Maybe I could believe that. Yeah, this whole primal thing, the carnivore thing is as primality. It's like, that's just like, I think Connor even said it in the discussion. It's like, that's a load of shit, man. Like, hunter-gatherer societies, like 5% meat on you know, like maybe like 5-10% depending. Berries don't run away, man. Potatoes don't run away. Animals do, and if you're running them down with a fucking spear, you probably just come like, I'm going back to the potatoes. Like, you know, there comes to a point when it's just not worth it. Obviously, there are, or there were, advantages to hunting during the winter and stuff like that. But often it was like the domestication of animals, and the value of it at the time was probably dairy, which is why people in the northern hemisphere typically can digest dairy. It's like associated with the blue eye gene. So it has more to do with like being able to provide yourself through the winter rather than necessarily even consuming meat. Like, meat isn't necessarily something that I think is, to be honest, that natural for anyway. But not that it would matter anyway. I know, like, cow's milk contains female hormones. Being vegan is more masculine. I know it's kind of ironic. It's actually really ironic. I mean, like, look at one of the biggest things is or the littlest, depending on who you are, in this conversation is erectile dysfunction, right? Like, erectile dysfunction is massively associated with atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is massively associated with animal products. So animal products, and we'll see this, animal products are massively associated with erectile dysfunction because you're clogging your arteries, and there's very small arteries in that area. So if you clog them, it just stops working very well. And then you have to take something like a little blue pill to essentially expand your blood vessels to be able to indulge in your masculinity, quote unquote. You know, like, so it's kind of ironic, man. PP needs to get jacked to promote vegan masculinity. You know, you're actually 100% right. I should just go to the gym. I waste my time going to the library. I should go to the gym. Now, where am I? If anyone wants to ask a question, drop it in chat. I'll stay for another 5-10 minutes. Drop it in chat. If you want to donate to be put at the top of the list, obviously I can be bought. I've said this before. Yeah, testosterone levels are slightly higher in vegans as well. There's what's it called? The free testosterone, I think is. So it's one of those things where it's like probably not going to have like that much of a benefit in terms of, like, in general, like increasing testosterone in men, unless you're like on an anabolic steroid and you're increasing your androgen receptors and stuff like that, unless your receptivity is now higher, it's not going to have that much of a benefit. But you're right, yeah. One of the main things is that our estrogen levels are lower, and that really has the benefit of preventing cancers. More than anything, it has the benefit of preventing prostate cancer, which is the most deadly cancer for men, like male specific cancer, from what I'm aware. So yeah, it's just like, I started powerlifting for the sole purpose of showing vegans can be strong. I squat and deadlift 600 pounds now. Bloody hell, that's pretty fucking good, man. Like, I can't do that. Like, the highest I ever got, like the most ego lift It's a proper ego lift. It was the leg press, and the highest I ever got was 350 kg, which I don't know what that is in pounds actually. But that was that was the biggest lift I've ever had. It was I could do 3 sets of 10 on 350 kg, and that was like yes, I am now strong. But I've not really tried to like be a. I've tried, but I always lose. I lose myself to pizza and stuff. That's really it. Like I want these body goals, right? I want to be this like hench vegan demigod, except like takeaway, right? Like or like in Doritos, like hummus. Right? Like, how am I supposed to stop eating hummus? I don't. It's just it's difficult. Okay. Unless there is any immediate questions, I will bounce and keep this nice and short so that people can actually rewatch the stream without having a fear of watching like a 3-hour long conversation. So vegans do generally live longer than others. We'll have a 15% reduced risk of all-cause mortality if you're eating a healthy vegan diet, right? And then that's one of the things that like is important to bring up, right? Because you can be a vegan for ethics like me and absolutely abuse yourself. Like it's really easy to do. Like, believe me, I participate in it all the time. Like whether it's like drinking alcohol, consuming high amounts of fat, salt, and sugar, like it's just really, really easy to do. But that's just in general. It's just in our society, right? Junk food's everywhere. Excuse me. Can you explain the first most basic contradiction from a Hegelian perspective when he's talking about this moment? What do you mean, like when we say this moment, as in the here and now? And when I say this moment, I'm really I'm already reflecting upon a moment that is already passing. And so when I say this moment, it's you can no longer be in that moment as you say it. So when I say here and now, the moment is already gone, and I'm reflecting upon that moment, and that moment can no longer exist. So if I was to say this moment, it is only really available in the next moment in terms of reflection. I hope that, and the golden snail's there. Yes, there's the golden snail. So like, he's really talking about the temporality of. He's really talking about the temporality of the immediate, and this is what Kant would refer to the thing in itself, but he would refer to as immediate experience. The what we gain from this is just the universal quality of being, and that's all you really get from that. But in giving it a designation and saying this moment, it's already passed and it no longer could exist. So you can't actually designate the here and now beyond saying here and now. Because if I was to say this cup as this moment, but then it can't be that cup anymore. He's basically making a Heraclean argument. Like Heraclitus says it, I think, really well when he says, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, it's a man cannot step into the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. Everything is in a state of flux from this position, where we're moving from immediate experience to immediate experience, and so you have no possibility of essence, and essence only comes from the removal from the immediate experience and the reflection upon it. So I hope that is explains that, Orgate. So to really understand being, you have to move beyond the immediate. To really understand the actual, you have to move beyond the immediate and understand the essence and the concrete immediate and the essence of what it means to be as united. and that's actual spirit. That's the actuality. But before that, you have, let's say, like being would be just this raw experience of reality. So I hope that explains that, Orgate. If it doesn't, just let us know. How do you get the information on health? I go to a doctor, they say I should eat meat. Really? Like, well, I mean, doctors only get about 15 hours. Like, often, like, they only get about 15 hours of education, like, in terms of nutrition. So they're usually quite useless. But you try, they're no very basics. But, you can, there's plenty of sources. I think nutrition facts are pretty good on YouTube. It's like, obviously it's a non-profit organization run by Dr. Greger, in which they review medical journals. There's loads of vegan doctors. There's loads of like one of the biggest things is like insurance companies in the United States were promoting a vegan diet because of its effects on longevity. So things like studies a lot of the time are and like the sort of pioneering doctors are the best ones to look to. Obviously conflicting sources as they may, but the NHS has already said that veganism is healthy. So you can go and check out the NHS's website, and it actually says like a vegan diet, if done appropriately, is healthy. So it's like even the medical institutions in the UK recognize that a vegan diet is healthy and suitable. The British and American Dietetics Association both say it's suitable for all stages of life, and the Americans even say that it can be used to treat diseases. So like, it's not something that's kind of new. It's been around for a while. It's just more about making sure that you're hitting your macros and your micronutrients, and you'll be all right. It's not too hard. How do you go beyond the immediate reflection? That would be the Hegelian point. To propose a limited existence would be an act of reflection anyway, because you're no longer in the here and now. You're proposing a limited essence. You're saying this is a cup. This is like, you are designating species, right? It's a form of genus. You can now say like, this is a thing, a discrete determinate object, and that's a matter of reflection. If you are at a pure here and now, then you can only really say here and now. So you're already doing it. You just don't realize you're doing it. So this is a contradiction because referring to two different things simultaneously, and how do we know the essence from that? Oh, do you mean like, so yeah, it is a contradiction in saying like, in proposing an essence, it's a necessary contradiction, but the alleviation of that contradiction is actuality. It's you can actually find this out in if you wanted to understand this in terms of Hegel's thought, check out The Science of Logic and the Science of Logic Book 3 Actuality is where I would recommend go and looking at, and it's the unity of being and essence is actuality, and that's basically the law of identity. Like P is P, that is identity, and identity is actuality. For you to say that something actually exists, for a thing to give a designation which actually corresponds to reality, is to unify and resolve a contradiction. To say that these two, that the essence or the notion is one with itself, essentially. That my thinking and the thoughts that I'm thinking are actually one. Like I am, in other words. And he talks about the inherent contradiction of I am, and how its resolution occurs in spirit. So that's what I'd recommend checking out. What's left after that? I think Hegel said that we can't just imagine alternative assertions like the Greek dialectic, that they came from a contradiction. Yeah, he basically just said, well, the reason he criticizes the Greek dialectic Orgate is basically, I mean, this is part of tangent, right? Like, but he basically criticizes the Hegelian dialectic because, not the Hegelian, the Greek dialectic, because it starts too soon. It basically makes an assertion rather than starting at the necessary. The dialectic must start from the necessary to show the progression in reason. You have to have the foundation of what must be in order to then develop into what is, like to actually fundamentally know it. There are inklings of hermeneutics already in Hegel, where he basically says that our knowledge of these kind of we are trying to find the first cause, and that's like the goal. So like our understanding of being is in and of itself, or the ground, right? Like our understanding of it is already incomplete, but the only way we're going to be able to show that it's incomplete is upon reflection and our attempts to explain what the ground is. And that's where we move from ground to existence to actuality. Existence actually being what we would consider essence. So ground is like, as in like the first proposed dialectical foundation. Then the movement through that allows us to understand what that actually is in terms of having a discrete identity, and the resolution of those two things together is actuality, and it forces a change in our conception of the ground to begin with, which leads on nicely to hermeneutics. Will you explain threshold deontology the way you and Ask Yourself explain is completely different from one another? Yeah, that's because Ask Yourself doesn't read any philosophy. But thank you for the donation, Hunter. The way I would engage, I mean, to be entirely honest with you, the way I engage in threshold deontology, I mean, it depends on the threshold deontologist, to be entirely honest with you. Some people do explain it differently to me. The way that you should look at it, though, is that it's a form of deontology. It's not a form of consequentialism. Like, one of the things that it gets criticized for is appearing as if it collapses into consequentialism. Ask Yourself often says it collapses, or Ask Yourself and Avi say it collapses into consequentialism. If you say it collapses into consequentialism, then it's consequentialism, and it's not threshold deontology. The point of threshold deontology is to show that there is a rational threshold, right? At which point, the idea of the rational threshold in the first place is essentially to say that you act in accordance with reason, and then after that threshold, you are continuing to act in accordance with reason in relation to the consequences, and to show that the actualization of a certain consequence is what you are trying to achieve, and it forces you to reflect upon the threshold, upon your reasoning. And this is like W.D. Ross, for example, talks about something similar in The Right and the Good, when he says essentially, like, to actualize the best consequences, we should do that which is rational. So it's not something that is falling to consequentialism in the sense that, like, we now evaluate based on the consequences get so high, so we evaluate it. It's purely through reason. It's through the application of reason. It's a deontological position. Do your duty, and in doing your duty, you can free yourself. Doing your duty, you can express the greatest overall possible good in both in your reason and in the consequences. In fact, the consequences are only evaluable through reason in the first place from a deontological movement. So from a deontological position, through knowing my duty, do I understand the consequences? But I mean, like, the best place to look, to be entirely honest with you, if you're interested in this kind of ethics, is, I think, a little bit of a sidestep. I would recommend it's Dean Moyer, deontology and consequentialism in Hegel's Philosophy of Right. Brilliant essay, really short, It's part of a collection of essays titled in a book called Hegel's Philosophy of Right. It really explains why Hegel argues that there is from both a deontological and a consequentialist notion, because the consequentialist, the reason, the reality of a situation leading to tragedy is to say that we were trying in the first place to bring around some sort of teleological goal, and in that telos being conflicted, in the confliction of duties, we can see the confliction of duties in a consequence, and that allows us to institutionally reevaluate our rationality. If that explains it, I hope that explains it. But thank you for the donation, and thank you very much for the donation, MST. Is that Misty Nut? But thank you very much for the donation. I really appreciate it, for the computer fund. It is really appreciated. I'm really hoping that I'm going to be able to get it soon. I keep saying this, but I'm actually waiting for an organization to pay me back money, and then I'm going to try and take that money, put some money towards it, and then get a computer that can stream, because I'll and also video edit. So, but the good news is I've already got a video card, a 970. I don't need anything more than that, and I'll if I get a 1.3 grand together, I should be able to have a good PC to essentially stream and edit on, so I can do this kind of content. So we're getting there, slowly but surely. It's coming together. So, but I really do appreciate the donation. It really is appreciated. In threshold deontology, you reach your threshold. Does that action become obligatory or simply justifiable? Open a GoFundMe. I don't know if a GoFundMe would be a good idea. Do you think a GoFundMe would be a good idea? I think the point of the threshold is to say it's a threshold in terms of reason, in which case it's about something that's supererogatory, and you're going beyond duty at this point, and you're trying to express the reasons that existed in duty. So it would be, it can't be a duty in a normal sense. It has to be beyond the call of duty, I would say, in terms of threshold. An organization. Does that sound like, I don't know how you're putting it in quotes and that. But yeah, an organization owes me money. I overpaid them. They owe me money. I am indeed talking about the mafia. No, I'm not. But yeah, an organization. I don't want to name them because, I don't know if it has anything to do with liable or something. If I'm brand, bringing something down on that brand, and they'll just be like, we're not giving you your money back now, and instead we're suing you or some shit. I don't know. Yeah, it works. Almond from the Atheist Republic is doing it for their legal expenses. All right, well, I'll give it a go. I mean, I don't know if you are interested in that, but yeah, absolutely, 100%. I'll start a GoFundMe. Obviously, only give if you can afford to. But any donations are appreciated. Yeah, the way that AY explains DT, it sounds like utilitarianism. Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think it does to sound like rule utilitarian. Obey the rule until the consequences hit a point, in which case you need to just obey the consequences, which is why rule utilitarianism gets criticized as falling into act utilitarianism. But yeah, 100%. I completely agree. Yeah, I don't think he understands what it is, but I don't think he's read any philosophy for the most part. I don't think he just whatever, man. You know what the guy's like. Okay, this is the last question, right? Because this is Hegel stuff as well. So this is man, you just need to buy me course. Right? So in the cup example, I see that this is both the cup in the moment and not the cup in the moment. I reflect on this, and what do I learn? That the cup exists across moments. It's more of the fact that to give the limitation in terms of, so to limit existence categorically is already to leave the immediate existence and propose an essence. It's a universal. So like, for there to be a cup, they're necessarily, and this is Kant, right? For there to be a cup, you've already applied certain categorical restrictions, limitations to reality for this to have its distinct identity. Now, what Hegel's pointing out, and that Kant doesn't recognize, is that when Kant says the thing in itself is purely immediate existence. You don't have to propose something external to categorization that is beyond our experience of reality. It is simply non-categorized reality, which is just here and now. It's absolutely universal. It still purports to consciousness. And that's the main thing that he's trying to get across. And the contradiction is trying to say that there is distinct determinate objects prior to the reflection, the categorical reflection, which leads to being able to say this cup. When I say this cup, I've already, in the words of Blanchot, to say, and this is a paraphrase, he says this woman, to say this cup, I have already taken its paper plastic reality away from it. I have destroyed it. I have annihilated it. Right? It is necessarily antithetical to the cup, to the existence of the cup, to say that it's its essence. Its essence necessarily cannot be it, because what it is universal, and what I'm proposing is discrete. So I'm already limiting reality categorically, and so my categorical limitation of reality is necessarily a contradiction, which is why Hegel would say there is no greater contradiction than I am, because to say I am is to propose my being and my essence, and only in the unity of that contradiction do I gain actuality, and that's where identity comes from. So the thing in itself is already there. Like, yeah, so the thing in itself is the most, when Kant thinks that it is the most unknowable reality, Hegel says it's the most immediately known thing we have. And Kant just didn't know what he was talking about. So yeah. Okay, guys. Dude, Hegel was pretty smart. And on that, yes, absolutely. And on that, thank you everyone who donated. Thank you everyone who asked questions. And thank you to my patrons on Patreon for making this stream possible. I will be doing another Q&A very soon. I'll be posting that on Patreon tonight.